It's working.
Se calhar isto não funciona. Okay. Hello. Good afternoon. We are going to start now the keynote. So it will be the closing of the first day of the conference. First of all, just a few announcements. The B2B meeting for the people who have registered, it will take place at the Posada da Juventude, at the hostel, at 6 o'clock, so right after the keynote. And there will, at 6 o'clock, we will also have a free walking tour in Guimarães, so you are very welcome to join. Otherwise, after the conference, we will also mingle in the center of Guimarães, probably in Largo de Oliveira. So thank you very much for this first day of conference. And with no further delays, I'm going to start by introducing Stephen Feldman, who will tell us about open communities. So thank you very much. So I give the floor to you, Stephen.
Thank you. If I wander away from the microphone, somebody shout at me and tell me that you can't hear me. Firstly, thank you for staying till gone 5 o'clock to listen to me talking. I'm also an imposter. Maria talked about imposters. So standing up here in front of you as a keynote speaker is a great honor for me. It's something that I've been waiting to do for a long time as well, so I'm very pleased to be here. The theme of this conference is remembering how we started. And it prompted me to think, not only should we remember how we started, but perhaps we should remember the aspirations that we had as individuals and as a community when we started. Those sort of founding values that bound us together to form an open community. And what I want to do in the next 30 minutes or so is look back at some of those values and take stock of where we are, what worked out, what might not have worked out the way we thought it was going to work, and perhaps point to some thoughts about how we progress as a community. This is prompted by my love of the community, it's prompted by my observations, and it's prompted by being involved in too many arguments on too many mailing lists and on Twitter, and actually thinking, what's going on in our community that we spend so much time arguing? And maybe some of you don't spend time arguing and you won't understand this, but bear with me because I think some of this stuff is really important stuff. So these are my observations, they're my thoughts. It's not a criticism of anybody. It's not a criticism of a group. It's not even an exhortation to do things differently. It's just the personal stuff that I want to share with you, and maybe it'll work, and you'll think, I can recognize that in the way I behave. So what I want to do is I want to put some flashcards up here, some ideas, some thoughts about the things that we say about ourselves, or maybe the things that we'd like to be able to say about ourselves, and see how many of these you agree with. So when we get to the end, at the end of each one, what I just want is, I'll say, so what do you think? And if you agree with me, wave, and if you don't agree with me, don't wave. Just so we get some show of hands, a little bit of action, because it helps to have some action at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So, we're united by a love of maps, geography, location. We believe, or many of us believe, that this technology can solve problems in the environment, in health, disasters, business efficiencies, risk management, education, transport, democracy and fairness even. And put simply, we're united by a belief that geo helps make the world a better place. Hands up? Okay, that's cool. So I was right with that one. We define ourselves as being an open community, and You can define open however you want, whether it's the source code, it's the access to the software, whether it's the community. We believe that we are open, and more importantly, we believe that open is better or best. Yay, we're doing well. We're a welcoming community. It's easy to find a way into our community, and we make new people feel welcome. Am I right in thinking that's not as many hands? I think so. There are no barriers to participation, contributing, or using software. Our activities and our events are accessible to the disabled, to the poor, to other minorities, and this is a priority for us. I would describe this as a graph of diminishing hands. That's fine, because you're getting my point. We embrace diversity, whether it's in race, whether it's in gender, and whether it's other minorities. Okay, I'd say maybe that's one we aspire to do rather than, but we can talk about that. We're tolerant of different opinions and approaches. Even if occasionally we get things wrong, we're the good girls and guys, and we learn from our mistakes and successes and continually strive to improve. Oh, come on, be a bit more generous. Come on, hands up. Okay. So, there's a problem, right? Or for me, there's a problem. It doesn't always work out quite like that. We can be a fractious community, and sometimes our conversations don't live up to the ideals and the standards and aspirations that we've set for ourselves. I want to look now at what are the characteristics of an open community, and particularly a global tech community. And I think the words global and tech are really important in understanding where things might go wrong. What are the characteristics that contribute to a lack of harmony, to tension within our community? And I'm going to delve into some very trivial sociology and anthropology, perhaps in this talk. If you actually know stuff about this, forgive me. I'm using the words without necessarily being the expert, but I still think they have some value for us. And most importantly, these are my reflections. I've got to keep emphasizing that. You may see it differently, and that's fine. These are my reflections that I want to share with you. Joanna's given me the platform for 40 minutes. That means you're going to hear what I think, and maybe you won't agree with me. So, what are the common things that motivate people to get involved in an open source community? Go search for it, go do some research on it, and what you'll discover is that there are a whole series of motivational factors. We're not all here for the same reason. So, yeah, you can look at that, and they're all the sorts of things that people talk about as being important to them when they join an open source community, and not just this community, all communities. Yeah. And when we break them down, we see these sorts of things, right? And there's a question now, which is how many of these apply to you? You know, yeah, we all have passion, I think, for this stuff. We're not doing it because we don't care. You know, you all put your hands up when we talked about Geo making the world better. We're here at this conference because we want to refine our skills, we want to learn, we want to share. But for many of us, open source is our primary source of income. A survey on Drupal showed that for 70% of Drupal contributors, Drupal was their sole or main source of income. So if you earn your living from something that you're also passionate about, then this stuff is really going to be important to you, right? And if it's important to you, it's easy to see how something that's important can turn into something that becomes fractious, argumentative, whatever else. But there are other things that turn us on. You know, there's recognition. We've talked about recognition this morning. Maria talked about it in a way. And recognition is important because recognition is how we get value and esteem within the community. it's also recognition that leads to job opportunities, which may be the way that we end up earning a living from this stuff. And underpinning it all is a belief in open source as a development model, as a way of doing software that is better. So I think, you know, if I was going to identify this and break it down, I'd be talking about passion right at the top, learning. This is a community that wants to learn from each other. I'd recognize the fact that this is a source of income for many people. Let's do a show of hands here. How many people earn part or all of their income from open source? That's quite a lot. I don't know whether it's the 70% of Drupal, but it's certainly around 50%. So, yeah, I think an important thing is that it helps us to build an identity in this community. I guess the reason that I'm standing up here as a keynoter is because I have an identity in this community. So that's also important to me. And at the bottom, but by no means least important, is the ideology, the values that we hold and that we share. So these are the things that motivate us. But they're also the things that create the tensions and the arguments. And I want to share a thought with you. Open source contribution is about us voluntarily coming together for shared passion and for a shared mission. If we all keep our shared passion aside and put our passion and our shared values to one side and work for our individual goals, then we'll create tension in our community. And I've said this here, identity is as important in open source communities as it is in society at large. And we're living at a time when identity is becoming more and more dominant in all of our interactions with other people. And if you're a Brit, think about Brexit and Remain. If you're an American, think about the Republicans and the Democrats and the failure to find any common ground. If you're involved in gender issues in any side of the discussion about gender issues, you know how identity leads to controversy at the least. And I think that conflict in our community, in open communities in general, is often, if not always, based around identity. The two things are interlinked. And so why do we argue? Well, we argue because the stuff's important to us. We argue because it's part of our lives. We argue because it may be our source of income. And it may just be part of who we are. But we argue because we're instinctively tribal. We form into these little groups. And a guy who writes very well on open source, and I commend him to you, his name's Brandon Hayes, go search for him. He said that tribalism is the act of attaching one's own identity to a shared group identity. And it's a tough one to fight, as a pre-programmed default tribalism was key to the survival of the human species for hundreds of thousands of years. So what he's saying is that being tribal, linking yourself and tying yourself to a group identity is a fundamental essence of being human. And this is also, in my opinion, what prompts controversy and argument between different tribes. And I'll get to the tribes of OSGeo in a second. So let's look at these tribes. There's OSGeo sitting in the center, and what are the tribes that formed within OSGeo? Well, they're the users. You know, the users want the software, they want it to do things, they may well be contributors as well, but they're a very specific group of people. And right at the heart of our community are the people who write the code. You know, we've got no community without the people who write the code. But then we've also got people like me and lots of other people who don't write code, but are community builders and evangelists and who help us to reach out to other places, who take our conferences to far off parts of the world, who do all of this sort of work. And then there are our friends in academia, the researchers and the students who use our software, who further our software, and finally, of course, there are the businesses. And you know, we're all part of the OSGeo family, but we identify with our individual tribes. And if you listen to our friends in the academic world talking about business, you may hear them saying some things that are not 100% positive. Yeah, if you talk to the developers about the users, you may well hear some response from developers about users, which expresses a lack of understanding about the challenges that users face. Why can't they all be like me? Why can't they all work from the command line? So, and it goes on, you know, and I could cite all of the ways that we form into groups of people that we agree with, and then we start to formulate not an enemy, but somebody that we disagree with, and occasionally that gets more tense. And then, from the outside, comes another tribe, right, that aren't quite part of our community. But actually, you know, I'm not going to say it, Location Tech. Location Tech are the bogeyman of OSGeo. They are our greatest friend, right? They are our ally, and they are our competitor. We don't know what we think about them, but we find it really easy, because they're outside of our circle, to hate them, right? You know, it doesn't take Location Tech to do anything very much for us to go into ballistic mode about how we're at war with them, right? And more recently, they've learned how to do this as well, so now they're in ballistic mode and they're at war with us. You know, and we've got geonuclear holocaust brewing between our two organizations, when actually 99% of the time we agree with each other and we want to promote the same sort of vision of open geospatial. So just be aware that, you know, we have these tribes, and they are the building blocks of controversy, confrontation, and of tension. And like, we think we're on the side of the angels. You know, we're the good guys, and they're the bad guys. And sometimes we even think that they're the bad guys. You know, I mean, come on, everybody. You know, it's like, these are not the bad guys. There'd be no conference today if the GeoCats and the GeoSolutions, and excuse me, all the other people that I can't remember to mention at this instant, hadn't sponsored this event. It wouldn't happen, right? Half of you put your hands up because you earn a living from open source. These can't be the bad guys. How can they be the bad guys who provide people with the jobs to write the software that you can then do whatever it is you want to do with it? These are the good guys, right? And we need to change the dialogue, as far as I'm concerned, to recognize that these are the good guys, not the bad guys. So, back to my friend Brandon Hayes again, and yeah, he's been really helpful to me. I want to talk to you about something called the identity spectrum. And the identity spectrum is this idea of how personal identity, which is that red line, and group identity, which is the bad line, they intersect, and how, as you go from a coalition, which is essentially a loosely federated group of people who sort of agree on some common interest and work together to achieve a goal, becomes a community, and in a community, we start to strengthen the group identity whilst we slightly sacrifice our personal identity. Not a lot of sacrifice, but you can see by the time we get to the tribe, personal identity is being overwhelmed by group identity. Now, we all know this feeling when we're conflicted between our personal belief, which may well be part of our identity, whether it's around gender, whether it's about race, whether it's about economics, and our group identity, our tribal identity, which is that we as a group want to do something. And can we do things together when we disagree about other things? And how we manage to do that is when we move in that space between being a community and a tribe. If we get right over here to the cult space, and we don't want to be here, in the cult space, right, you have given up all sense of personal identity and you are just a slave to the group identity. I think that happens in certain extreme political parties, and I'm sure it happens in other spaces as well. But I really want people to think about the extent to which they are willing to compromise their strongly held personal beliefs for the greater benefit of the community, the OSGeo community, how we can stay in the zone between community and tribe and compromise ourselves slightly for the greater good of the whole thing. Because that's where we avoid conflict rather than getting into conflict. So I wanted to talk to you about some bad tribal habits. These are certainly things that I recognize in myself. You may not recognize them, but we'll see in a second. So the first one is blind evangelism, a sense that your tribe's cause, in this case open source, is a one-size-fits-all solution, and that the entire world would be better if everybody just used our software, and what we need to do is convince everybody in the world to use our software. This allows us to feel confirmed in our beliefs about ourselves, but what it sacrifices is any empathy for the desires and needs of others. You know, just because people use Windows, maybe they're not bad people, right? They might be misguided, but they're not bad people. The proprietary is evil syndrome, you know, this obsessive commitment to this system. I mean, this is when you've gone way, way over the top. We can't use a tool even if it's free because it's not open source. How many times have we spent hours and hours developing an open source or implementing an open source solution because we wouldn't use a free tool that Google provided, right? You hear people saying things like, Windows makes me feel physically ill. Does it really? I mean, you know, what an exaggeration. You know, is it that I'm conditioned to think Windows is terrible because I spent 10 years using a Mac? I mean, this is stupid, you know. I mean, Google aren't evil, Microsoft isn't evil. You know, we might not want to use their software, but we don't have to get obsessed about this stuff. And, you know, sometimes we do stupid things. Yeah, I mean, I don't know where we are with GitHub at the moment because I keep seeing GitHub up here, but GitHub is a Microsoft product now, I believe, right? Yeah, we're still using GitHub. Are we going to move everything out of Git repositories because Microsoft own the product, whilst it remains free to us? I don't know, but just think about that. So another thing that we have is this fine shaving of difference. We are great at arguing about things that nobody even understands the difference between except for us. You know, so few things divide tribes more sharply than being ideological next door neighbors. If you don't hate my enemies, you can't be on my side. So sometimes, you know, it's painful when you see a community, whether it's a technology community, a religious community, a political community, who all want the same thing, and yet they bicker incessantly about the right way to do it, rather than just following slightly different paths to get to the same goal. And God help the heretic. You know, our biggest hatred of all is often for the adjacent community that becomes perceived as a rival or a heretic. Think of location tech for us, you know, and they are the heretics. Think of HOTOSM team, the hot team. You know, go and read on the OSM lists the vitriol that is poured onto people who have gone to join HOT. You know, What did they do that was so terrible? They went out and mapped areas of the world that aren't mapped so that we're better prepared for disaster. This is sinful stuff they're doing, guys. You know, I mean, this is really terrible. But you read the lists and you'd be shocked at the vitriol that's there. And, you know, if anybody was actually to make a decision, and I know one or two people who've done this, if anyone makes the decision, actually, I'm fed up with OSGeo, and I'm going to join Location Tech. I mean, they're like, oh my God, you know, they are never to be mentioned again. And God help you if one of us ever went and got a job with Esri. I cannot imagine the vitriol that will pour down on us because we chose to take a job with a proprietary vendor. It's so satisfying to burn the heretic. When someone leaves the tribe, they've questioned our collective identity, our rightness, our specialness. Our natural reaction is to fight back and to invalidate that person and prove that they're wrong and their ideas are wrong. So, what's ironic is that people who are opposed to a given tribe themselves are defined by tribalism. So, in fact, the notion of enemies only exists at the tribe and cult end of the spectrum, you know, out there on the right end of that spectrum. At the other end, we just get along with each other, we argue about some things and we're comfortable. It's when we move to the right-hand side, when we move into the cult behavior, that things start to get nasty. They get very dark. And this isn't OSGeo. I want to stress that. But what I do want to say is there is an end point out there that we don't want to go to, which gets dark because we're so busy hating other people that we lose sight of all the things that we agree with them. So I just want you to pause for 1 second and consider those behaviors and your own interactions with our community, and how many of those behaviors do you recognize in yourself? I know that I can stick my hand up and say, I've been there, I've seen that, and I've done some of that, and I wish that I hadn't with hindsight. So now let's look at why we argue. What is it about open communities that prompts us to argue? And specifically, open, global tech communities. Because we just love to argue. And most arguments start with communication, because we aren't great at communicating. If we could stay silent, we wouldn't argue, but we wouldn't get much done. There's a sense that we're talking often to a brick wall, which is the other person who's not hearing us, you know, and this is like, we're all shouting into the internet at each other, no one's listening, no conversation is going on. You know, I love Twitter, I spend too much time on Twitter, my wife's sitting here and she would tell you how much time I shouldn't spend on Twitter. Right, but if you want to get into an argument, get on Twitter, because it's a great place to disagree with people. So, a thought is that large geographically distributed communities can only work because there's an internet. You know, if we lived in Portugal, in London, in Brazil, in Africa, in Australia, in New York, and there was no internet, we wouldn't have a global community. If every time we wanted to publish something, we had to send a letter to everybody by the postal system, there'd be no community. The internet has enabled us to become a global community. The internet is asynchronous when we communicate. You don't need the other person on the end of a video chat. You can send an email, a Twitter, an IRC, and somebody can read it later and respond to it. Mail lists, forums, all of these things, they work asynchronously, and what they do is they provide us with a cloak of anonymity. Nobody knows who we are. We don't know who they are properly. All we do is send messages to each other and respond to messages, and we become message junkies, to be honest. And we don't all speak English as a first language. for many of us, probably for most of our global community, English is not their first language. I'm humbled and astonished to be standing here talking to you in English and knowing that people from France, from Belgium, from Germany, from Portugal, from Spain, probably from Czechoslovakia, Romania, are all understanding me perfectly. If any of you were standing up here and speaking in your language, I wouldn't understand a word that you said. That's my weakness, but it also creates a problem because I assume because you understand me, that you understand nuance, that you understand humor, that you understand tone, and those things don't communicate well in e-communications anyway, and they certainly don't communicate well across the language. You know, and yet we don't take any note of that. You know, when somebody's, you know, when you see an argument developing on one of our mailing lists, and one of the people involved in that argument is speaking in a different, English is their second language, we're far too quick to pick them up on the errors in their language. So, yeah, and the last thing we do is we all want to have the last word. And I promise you, I am the champion at getting the last word in on an argument. But there are other people who are just as good as me. So, and there comes a moment when you just have to say, why don't we stop, right? Just stop. And the only way to stop is actually not to reply. It's just to say stop. So my hand goes up. I've done all these things. I'll try to do better, and I'll probably fail again, but I've still got to keep trying because we've got to find a more civilized way to have dialogue, in my opinion. So you might think that this is just the way things are, and it doesn't matter, and I think that it does matter. I think it really does matter. At the least, if we can understand what's making us disagree with other people and how our communications fuel that conflict, maybe we can get a little bit better at it. We're not going to solve it, but we can get better. Because if we don't, we risk burnout, we risk losing some of our most committed members, and we've seen that. People drop out because they've just had enough, they're burnt out. I've been there, I'm back, and who knows whether it's going to happen again. We risk forking, you know, and let's be honest, it's bad enough when projects fork. We don't really like to see projects forking, but when communities fork, that really is a tragedy for us. And you know, we want to avoid that, in my opinion. But I think we can have something called creative conflict, right? We have to embrace the fact that we're different and that we have different views. We have arguments about principles, priorities. We argue about free and open. We argue about which tools we should use. We argue about our governance models. But we can do all of that in a way that inspires us to improve our community rather than to diminish it. And that's what I am urging, is that we use our conflict, our difference, in a creative way to make a better world. And just a reminder, no one has to win. We all can win together without anybody losing. Discussing alternatives, learning from each other, and finding a compromise is the massive win for our community. Last thought from me, assume the best from everybody. Avoid the paranoia of assuming bad motives in people. Always assume that the other tribes, the other adjacent groups, have the best of intentions, and keep in mind how much we share rather than our little differences. And last of all, you know, we wouldn't do this if we didn't love it. So let's keep it fun, because if we lose the fun, then we will lose the sense of community that we've got. Coming here today, meeting old friends, making new friends, that is what has made Phospher-G and OSGeo such a wonderful home for me. And I'm sure for many other people. Let's lose that, let's keep it fun. And one last thing. So That was the end, by the way, there. This is just an afterthought. We've got a conference in Dar es Salaam in 50-odd days now. It's sometime to 27th of August, right? Phospher-G Global is in Dar es Salaam. We've got the biggest travel grant program that we have ever put on. Over 50 people, probably 60 people, will be able to go to Phospher-G Dar es Salaam because of this travel grant program. When you go out of here at the end, there's going to be a box, and you can take a 10-euro note, you can take a 20-euro note. If you really want to, you can take a 50-euro note. Those of you who remember Alice's Restaurant by Arlo Guthrie might just get the rhythm of that. Take a piece of money out of your pocket, put it in the box, and together we might help another one or another two people to go to Phospher-G in Dar es Salaam who wouldn't be able to go there otherwise. And when you go home and you talk to all of your friends, bit.ly/Phospher-G TGP Travel Grant Program, in case you didn't get that, in capitals, and it's important to get the lowercase and the uppercase, Phospher-G TGP in capitals. That will take you to the OSGeo website, and you can make a donation online. But I don't want you to make a donation online. I want you to put money in the box on your way out. That's me done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a fantastic keynote. It will give us a lot to think in the next few days.